Hi folks, my name is Davin Michelson. I'm with Intertech and I teach the .NET Programming and the SQL Server Business Intelligence classes. I've been with Intertech for over 11 years and I've been working with SSRS since 2005. I actually worked with it back in 2000 as well, but I almost don't want to admit it. There were some issues with that version. Anyways, what I'm going to be covering here today is I'm going to walk through creating a report using something called the Report Builder. This is the simpler of the two tools useful for creating reports. And the cool thing about Report Builder is it does include something called the Chart Wizard. The Chart Wizard allows you to create a report that's going to include a chart. I'll show you some of the features that are available with that Chart Wizard, and understand that after you create the report with it, you can still go back and make all the modifications you wish with that particular report, including editing it back with Visual Studio, or what we call SQL Server Data Services, or Data Tools. So what I'm going to do is I'll just go ahead and open up Report Manager. Report Manager, of course, is the primary web application that's available if you've installed SSRS in native mode. Remember, SSRS can always be installed in integrated mode, where you have SharePoint actually control most of the security, most of the features of SSRS. Instead, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to do it right here from our Report Manager. They did change things up here. This happens to be the SQL Server 2016 edition. Remember, anybody who's a developer can download the free version of SQL Server Developer Edition. Microsoft is now giving it away, and it has all the features of the Enterprise Edition, except you don't have to pay a dime. You just go ahead and download it, install it on your machine, and you can work locally on your machine, whether it be at home or at work, and you can create reports. You can do the integration services, analysis services, and all the other cool stuff. Of course, working with the relational database as well. So that's what I have installed here locally on my laptop. I've got SSRS, of course, with SQL Server 2016 installed, Developer Edition. And one of the things they did when they refreshed the interface of the Report Manager site that we're looking at here is one of the things you might notice is there's no Report Builder button in the center like we used to have. Since SQL 2005, we've always been able to launch it from here, or we've been able to download it from Microsoft Download site and install it locally on our machines. Well, actually, now you have to download it from the Microsoft server. You're not going to actually run it from SQL Server anymore. You'll notice on my machine, if I navigate in deep enough, I do have that Report Builder link right here. And of course, they do have the Report Builder help site here as well, which really just navigates to an MSDN page. So what I'm going to do actually though is I'm going to launch it, assuming it's installed locally here, by choosing the paginated report. Paginated report just means a regular report that you want to create. And this will go ahead and ensure that I'm launching the correct tool, which is Report Builder. That's what we're talking about here. The mobile report, if you recall when I spoke in a different tutorial, this one will actually launch a special designer just for creating reports that appear correctly and nicely formatted on small screen devices, for example, maybe on a tablet or on a smartphone. So I'm going to choose Paginated Report, and of course it's asking, do I really want to switch apps? Why, yes I do. I want to go ahead and open up the Report Builder utility. Here we go. Now right off the bat, they do give us three different wizards. They give us a table or matrix wizard, which really is going to distinguish between a couple of different data regions. One that could have just a banded report for a table or perhaps even row groups. And then the matrix, of course, is if you start grouping across the columns with more of a pivot style report. I'm actually going to be choosing a chart wizard. Know that there is another choice that was available there, the map wizard. I didn't think just by clicking it would select it, but it did anyways. With the map wizard, then there's a variety of sources that can actually feed into that, including ESRI data, if you happen to have that in a database, or some ESRI files that you want to use to source your map report. Now right off the bat, it wants to know what data set I'm going to be using. It's assuming that I may want to choose an already shared data set that's already been published out here. Remember, just like with regular table reports, you have to get the three things in order. You have to get the data source, which is the connection information. And then based on that, you can create a data set. That's what we're looking at here. The data set is actually going to be the query, the stored procedure, or the view that you want to use. And then we can focus on creating the actual chart based on the data set. Each of them build on top of each other like that. So first you have to have data source, then data set, then chart. Funny thing is, here in the wizard, they try to work backwards because they assume that for a non-programmer user, they want to keep it as simple as possible, asking you what kind of report you want to create, where people could choose a chart. Now it's coming back one step saying, oh, by the way, the chart has to be based on a data set. What kind? And of course, if I say I want to create a data set, it's going to go one step further and say, oh, by the way, what data source are you going to use? What's your connection string? Most of the time with the reports that we create, we prefer to use shared data sources. This is an actual published connection string that's pushed off to your SSRS server, and it's shared amongst all your reports. So if you have 100 reports out there that have been published, and then the DBA moves your data source to a different environment or renames the server or does something else, well, you only have to change that information into one shared data source, and automatically all the reports will pick up that information. So usually we love to use the shared data sources. And I actually have a couple of them out here for these classic databases that were created for, I remember working with these in SQL 6.5, and I'm sure they were around even before that. The original publishers database, and then the Northwind database we used to have on Access. These are a couple of sample databases you can still install today directly from Microsoft.com. Do a search for SQL 2000 sample databases. Be cautious. I want you to know that you should only download the scripts from Microsoft's website. Don't download the scripts or these databases from anywhere else. And know that the scripts are so old that you may get some warnings when you execute them about some commands which are no longer viable that you're supposed to comment out if you want to create the databases. It's pretty simple, but you should just watch for those. And you can work with somebody who's pretty good with this Transact SQL language to make sure you get that run correctly to create the databases. So I'm going to actually be using the Northwind database. So I'm going to select that shared data source and click Next. And oh, by the way, I can always click on Test Connection to make sure everything's groovy. And it does look okay. Now it wants to know what table or tables am I going to be using? What views? What sprocs? Depending on your experience, if you're a hardcore SQL query writer, you could just say, I'm going to do this myself. Give me that. And you could just go ahead and write out your command if you'd like. Otherwise, if you want to choose a certain stored procedure, you can do that and then just specify its name. But you know what? I'm not going to do this. I'd rather have the wizard write the code for me because I'm a human being and I'm going to screw it up. So I'll uncheck that edit as text and bring back the wizard. And they do have all the tables here that are available in that Northwind database. Remember, these tables are showing up. There's also some views. Views are just like access queries. And then, of course, we have stored procedures, which are actually stored in the database. So actually, I'm interested in this one that says sales by category. We're going to look at one of these views here for sales by category just because it does the joining of a couple of tables for me. And I can see that it's bringing in these particular columns. And I could just blindly grab the whole view and say, yeah, give me everything. But technically, I don't need the category ID. And I really don't need the product name, and I'll show you why, but I'm going to leave him selected just for fun. So I'm going to bring in those three fields. There they are. Okay, and don't forget to run query. Go ahead and run it and see what kind of data is coming back. We should see some duplicates under category name because there's more than one product that go along for a particular category. Look, here's a couple of different beverages. So we got a lot of food coming along, and we got some product sales, which we'll have to convert into dollars and make it nice and friendly. So that's my query. So that's my data set, in other words. I've set up my data source. I've set up my data set. It's funny how this wizard now brings me back finally to the type of chart that I want to create. For example, I can choose a column chart where there are going to be vertical bars going across. There's going to be a line chart. Maybe I need to see like over time or a series of numbers. Maybe I want to see something like that over time. They do have the pie chart. Everybody loves a good pie chart, right? Pie charts can make a lot of sense so long as there aren't too many categories. If it gets to be a lot of categories, then you have a lot of slivers, and it's tough to distinguish the data. Plus, the numbers can eat up space. Bar chart, basically like columns, but laying it out horizontally. You may want to make your report landscape if you do this, if it's really important to show the differences between them, and if there aren't that many categories. And then area. There's some really cool area charts we have as well. Now understand that here in the wizard, they're really just giving us these 5 categories, but as I'll show you when we complete the wizard, we can go back and actually change the chart on the fly, and there's actually many more types of charts that we can choose. You'll also notice where it says use a stack chart to display the total of multiple series, or it talks about the multiple series down here as well. These are available for most of the chart types, but not pie. As soon as I click on pie, it's all disabled. And that's just about if I want to also include a series. So not only am I going to have categories of data, but maybe I have a series as well, groupings of the actual categories. So take all the categories, put them into this group, and then this group, and this group. But I'm just going to go ahead and make a simple pie chart here, and I'll click on Next. And now it wants to know about category, series, and then this one's the most important one. This is going to be the number crunching. Now, automatically, I want to make sure I get product sales into values. And you can just drag and drop it in here. Funny thing happens when you do, it automatically assumes that you want to add all the values for all the records inside of here. Now, if I left it just like this, it's going to take every row return and say, yep, here's your single number, and we get a pie chart with one color. That's kind of silly, so we don't want to do that. We actually want to break up that number based on categories. So I'm going to bring in category name and drop it in here. I could further break that up into product name, but I got to ask, does that make sense for a pie chart? Already we have it broken up into categories, so it's already going to be slivered up into categories. To break it up further into product name, I don't even know how the chart would handle that. We'd have to make sure we choose a different chart if we wanted to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Next. And it gives me a little preview of what the chart looks like. I'll click on Finish, and there we go. So here we are in Report Builder, and you can see that it's asking for a title, and maybe I'll just say Sales by Category, just to give it a name. And I know it's kind of getting cut off there. I can scroll here. Be careful, guys. If you're on a lower resolution screen, it's really easy to miss some of the most important windows. Like, for example, if your screen's only this wide, and then you happen to click on it like this, you might miss the chart data. That's one of the problems we have in the classroom sometimes, because this chart data is where we actually grab those values, such as the sum of product sales and the category name and so forth. Okay. We still have a report data window here, which stores my data source, which is a link to my shared data source, which is Northwind connection string. And then I have my data set, which it went ahead and just named data set 1. It probably wanted to give that a better name, but that's fine. But there's my fields. Now automatically this should do something because I stepped through the wizard, and they do give me the run button up at the top here. So I'll go ahead and click on that run button. And here we go. We have sales by category, and you can see based on the colors, we have beverages, condiments, confections, and so forth, and they align basically with this really simplistic looking pie chart. Honestly, it doesn't, it gets the work job done here, but there's some things I really want to do to this chart to make it look a little bit more professional. Okay, so we'll click back up here on the design, which allows me to go back and forth. Remember, you can click on design and run just to run them over and over and over. Do you like the color format? That's the question I got to ask first, because technically, over here on the right, they do have a palette area where you can change this if you want. In earlier versions, it would default to a different color schema, kind of like this, which is a little bit fluorescent, and I don't know if that's as professional looking, so they did change that default. You can go with earth tones as well, and grayscale might be more helpful depending on if you're printing it on a black and white laser printer. You'd have to take a look at that. There's also some pattern behaviors you can set up. All right, with the grayscale, let me go back to a normal color here. Pastel, that might be kind of nice. Not really. I'm just having trouble distinguishing the colors. Fire hurts your eyes. Don't do that. Especially if somebody's just waking up, getting into work. Ouch, my eyes. So we'll put it back on Pacific. One of the things that jumped out at me right away is the fact that it's going to be a pretty small chart. So I may want to, first off, make Report Builder a little bigger by double-clicking its title. And then I might want to make the whole report a little bit larger. Be aware of how wide things are set up here, right? Know that normally paper is 8.5 by 11, and we may want to have a 1-inch border. So if you can get your cursor right on it, you can stretch this out a little bit. Also right here, this line is actually for a report footer. You'll notice if I right-click, I can remove the page footer, but I'm going to leave that there. And that's got the execution time, which is pretty doggone convenient. Remember with text boxes, always grab them by that handle in the corner. Right? That's how you grab them. And remember, if you're ever clicking on anything, don't click inside like this, because sometimes it assumes you're editing it. But instead, click on the line. That can be a little bit more accurate, and then you can grab it. Okay, now that I have it stretched out, I can make the report a little bit bigger. Again, you can see how we have the different categories showing up. We'll go ahead and click on Run and see how this looks. And yeah, that's nice and dandy and everything, but we can do so much more with this. For example, one thing I may want to do is actually change a chart type. just right-clicking on it and choose Change Chart Type will bring up the official list of all the different chart types that we have. We happen to be in the shape area, and you can see this is the one we're looking at, but you can choose like a 3D version like this, or maybe an exploded 3D version. Click OK, and this can look a little bit more professional. Okay, so now when I go ahead and click on Run, that's kind of nice. Now we're actually getting exploded. I can see the sizes. Although that's the other thing, I'm not really seeing the numbers show up. Well, what you can do is you can right-click on it and say, show the data labels, doggone it. So you click on that, and now we're getting the numbers to show up, which can be a little bit more handy. I'll click on Run, and there we go. Now we have some numbers. Something else that's bothering me a little bit about these numbers is I know that they're a dollar value. And there's ways of getting into, like certain text boxes, you can get into a special text box property window. But actually over here to the right in the labels area, I'm just going to go ahead and change the format to C0, which means currency. And automatically a dollar bill or a dollar symbol will appear. So when I go ahead and run this now it looks a little bit more professional. We're even getting the commas in here. But I chose 0 to round off the last 2 digits past the decimal point. That's usually what all you need for a report. So I've got this all looking nice. You know, if it was bothering me that the numbers were there, if there's a lot more slivers, you can select that and actually change its position from auto to outside. This is a little secret trick you could do. This is about the position of where you want the label to appear, but when you choose outside, like that, and then you run it, now the numbers will be outside pointing to it. Of course, also did you notice, folks, that the chart went down about 50% in size because it has to make room for those data labels? So there's a catch-22. So it's nice that we have the labels outside, but now, of course, our chart is a little bit smaller. So you can make a decision about that. It is easier to read, admittedly. One thing that I might want to do is actually try a different chart altogether. Like, for example, maybe I don't want to do a pie chart at all. Maybe I'd like to do one of these, like a 3D funnel. Click OK on that one. That's pretty cool. So now we're getting a funnel effect. Let's see what it looks like when I run it. There we go. And we can see that the data is not sorted. Look at that, 103, 55, 82, 115. Now, of course, the problem is that we're not sorting it on category or sorting it based on the value, the sum number. So that's something we're going to have to fix. Besides that, should it be larger at the top or at the bottom? I think it should be larger at the top because it's wider and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Do I want to go with a funnel? I don't know. You know, there's that other one that was over here, this pyramid one. This might be kind of cool as well. So I'll click OK on that one. And enable 3D. I'm just playing around with that a little bit. So now I want it from smaller to larger. So how do I do that? Well, there's a couple of options, right? First off, we're using a view, which is already returning the data to us. If I had the rights, I could go into the database and actually change that view. You know, here in my data set, if I just double click it, this shows me selecting that. Maybe I could do an order by clause here, right? I can do an order by, because I'm selecting from that view. But you can also, if you don't have the rights to get into your data set, if it's a shared data set that they're offering you, you can also make the chart do the sorting. This is a little trick you can do. So we want to sort it based on category. Actually, not based on category at all. I'm sorry. We want to sort it based on the sum value, the sum of product sales. So what I'm going to do is for each category, I'm going to go ahead and choose Category Group Properties. And you'll notice on the left side I can choose sorting. Here in sorting, instead of sorting on category name, which means it's going to be alphabetical, which doesn't make any sense, I want to sort it based on product sales. But that's not exactly it either, because if I just sort on product sales, it's going to be each of the individual ones. I actually want to have the sum of the product sales for each category. So I'm going to click on the FX button. Remember, in Report Builder, anytime you see the FX button, this is really going to bring up a special window called the Expression Builder. This Expression Builder will help you actually form a calculation. Don't forget this leading equal sign. And guys, if you get any squiggly lines in here as you're working, it probably means you have a typo. So now that I have the actual product sales value, I'm going to go ahead and choose some common functions here. And I notice they have aggregate here. You can see there's an average, there's a count, but they have the sum here that I'd like to use. So I'm going to put my cursor right before the fields, and I can double click it. Kind of cool about this window here as well. You can see how they have some examples of how to use the sum function. And of course I could make it a little wider so we could see those full expressions, right? And they even give you a little description. But anyways, I'm just going to double click sum, and it pops up over here. I got to put that closing parenthesis at the other side here. Click on OK, and it should show up this way. If it just says, oh, that's a function, no, then there's something wrong. So now I'm sorting it based on the sum of product sales, and that's for categories. So let me go ahead and run this. Well, looks like we're close, but no cigar, because it's big to small. And we know that this is actually, it would have been perfect for the funnel one now. I went ahead to have the pyramid one. So what I need to sort this the other way, right? And there's an easy way to do that. Some of you folks might have caught this. If I just go ahead and click on it to bring up that window again, right click on that category name and choose category group properties. Back over here for sorting, I can just change this from A to Z, back from Z to A. In other words, ascending or descending order. So I'll change that to descending order, click OK, and run. And that's much better. So now we're actually getting the numbers to show up from smaller to larger. The colors are aligning up as well with the legend, right? When you're working with the chart, something that can be a little frustrating is making sure you're in the right selection mode. So sometimes I might click out here in the open area or in the footer or in between the footer or something, and then click on the chart. And sometimes you have to click 3 times to get exactly where you want to go. So understand that it's a matter of getting into the right selection mode. Okay, there's a little chart title here. It would have been nice to put a title in here as well. And I can add more artifacts if I want to for this particular chart. Remember, when you're working in Report Builder, such as I am, when you're done with it, you want to be able to save it off. So I'll choose Save As. And I want to actually browse to my server just as if I was using the local C drive, but I'm actually going to go to the name of my machine /report server. It's a little bit confusing because whenever you open up Report Manager, you go to localhost reports, but when you're saving it off or you're actually publishing to the server, then you go to localhost reports server. So inside of here, I might want to save this off to test, and I'll give it a name. So I'll call it Pyramid, and it's got the RDL file extension, and I'll save it off. And that should be it. It's now been saved off. Understand that one of my biggest gripes with Report Builder is I can close this all fine and dandy, and I can go into test, and I can see there is actual pyramid report, and it should work just like that. That's all cool. Okay. One of my gripes with this though is I'll go to Manage, which brings up all the different properties that I can do for this particular report. And they do have a link here to Edit and Report Builder, which I can go ahead and open it back up and make some more changes. Be aware you're playing with the only live version, the only copy of this report. Unless you specifically went out of your way and saved a backup copy somewhere, like maybe you'll create a subfolder out here on Report Manager called Backups, and you'll save it with a version number. If you don't do that and you start messing around with this report and you screw it up and the boss says put it back the way it was, you better hope you did save a copy somewhere, because you're playing with the only version that's available, the version that you're publishing to Report Server. And that's why sometimes I do like using Visual Studio instead for creating my reports. Although we don't get these wizards and we can't play with certain parts of what Report Builder can do, at least with Visual Studio I can check my reports into source control, such as using TFS, Subversion, Git, or one of these other source control managers that are pretty popular today. That way I can version and have multiple copies of a report, and if I modify a report dramatically and the boss has put it back, I can just check out an older version from source control and publish that version back in here. That's one thing to be aware of. Also remember, with Report Builder, folks, you only get to work on one report or no report. Whereas in Visual Studio, you can work with quite a folder full of reports or a project full of reports. By the way, Report Builder will not show you this property window by default. Normally this is closed, but if you ever want to get into the advanced settings of anything, if you really want to get into the advanced properties of any of these things, remember that you can go to the View menu and just check that box for properties. And then this dog will show up over here to the right. Okay? Well, all right. Well, that was just a little tutorial about using the chart wizard and then going back and making changes to my chart. I hope you found this to be helpful for working with Report Builder. I'd love to see you in class. We do have a class just on Report Builder, but that's a 2-day class. We have a 3-day class on SSRS using Visual Studio or SQL Server Data Tools. And hope to see you soon. Thanks very much for watching, folks.